August 1944. Normandy is still wet with night rain and burnt powder. The hedgerows sweat manure and cordite. A low river runs under a stone bridge that should already be American. Lieutenant Colonel James Walker stands in the ditch with mud soaking into his boots and listens to armor rumble behind him, engines idling hot in the dark, exhaust drifting like breath from a herd that wants to charge. The bridge is clear. The road beyond bends east. In his head it is already open. On paper it is not. He checks his watch for no reason except anger. The British want first light. The British want alignment phase lines a clean start. Gentlemen in due course. That is what he was told. He can hear that voice even out here in the dark, calm, clipped, almost polite. The tone of a man who believes war is a sequence you conduct, not a window you kick through before it slams shut again. The American tanks behind him growl and surge, then throttle back, then surge again. Crews are sitting in their armor hatches, cracked eyes red, waiting for a green light that does not come. Fuel trucks sit nose to tail on the farm lane. Blackout hoods over headlights. Drivers whispering about how long they can idle before they have to siphon from somebody else. Every minute burns gasoline they will need on the other side of that bridge. Every minute cools the panic on the German side. Walker presses one finger against the mapboard balanced on his thigh, keeping pressure on the crossroads east of the bridge like he can hold it in place by touch alone. If we move now, we pour armor through before they wake up. If we wait until morning, they stand back up. That is the whole war for him boiled down to hours. He smells hot oil, wet burlap, cow dung. He hears soft British leather in his memory boots, neatly aligned under a field table. Men smoking in order while a quiet voice explains that nothing proceeds until the artillery is perfectly staged. Then, reality slams back in American truck horns, muffled under canvas loaders, yelling for more shells, some sergeant cursing about fuel engines, revving too loud for a halted column. Two armies share one road and hate the way the other one fights. One side believes in the perfect blow, the other believes in never letting the enemy breathe. Walker watches the sky pale by a shade and feels 12 hours bleed out into the mud. The simple American story says that Montgomery is arrogant, that he slows the advance because he wants credit, that he will not release a bridge or a road net or an armored thrust until he is certain the photographs will show him as the architect. But that story, the one Walker hears, muttered in blackout tents between swallows of cold coffee, is not the truth that rules the ground in France in August 1944, because the truth is colder and older than ego. Britain is bleeding out and knows it. By this stage of the war, British infantry battalions have been chewed down and refilled and chewed down again until some companies are carried forward more by habit and duty than by flesh that can still be replaced. Armoured brigades that once rolled across the desert as proud instruments of imperial reach are now running on crews who cannot simply be conjured out of training depots, because there are not enough trained alive young men left to conjure. And every tank that brews up in a lane is not just metal lost, it is an irreplaceable crew, burned out of the order of battle forever. When Montgomery speaks about set-piece battle, about shaping the front, about not rushing about, waiting until firepower has been arranged into one concentrated hammer that will fall on ground of his choosing, at a time of his choosing, he is not talking about vanity, and he is not simply talking about cleanliness of execution. He is talking about survival math for a country that cannot afford to throw away what is left of its professional corps, and he carries that calculation like a live wire in his hand. The Americans standing on the same soil and looking at the same German line feel something utterly different, moving through their own bodies, something louder and more reckless, and to them more honest. They feel like a floodgate that has been kicked open and will not close again, because they are still landing fresh divisions, still pushing truck columns and gasoline and spare track links and artillery ammunition, night after night through mud and hedgerows, still plugging losses with new crews who come in loud and confident and still smell faintly of stateside floor polish. And so, when an American unit gets hit, the reflex is not stop and heal. The reflex is pour more steel through the hole and widen it before the enemy can seal it, because the guiding belief is that pressure itself will save lives by never allowing the German side to recover its footing. Walker lives inside that belief. To him, speed is not showmanship, it is mercy delivered early. To him, pausing is not caution, it is a quiet way of saying, we are going to let them get back up and force us to kill them twice. This is why Hallam's voice makes Walker grind his teeth. Hallam stands over a folding map table with his hands neatly laced behind his back, speaks in a level, almost classroom tone, and explains that nothing will be released until the artillery has been properly staged. The infantry has been properly aligned, and the armor has been massed exactly where it must be massed, so that casualties are minimized and success is assured. He says we will not be rushed, and he says it not as defiance but as duty. He believes he is saving lives. Walker hears the same words, and translates them in his nerves, as you will wait until it is convenient for us, and if your men die holding the shoulders of the corridor while we wait, that is acceptable friction. He feels his mouth taste like copper while he listens, because he is trying not to shout that the Germans are wobbling right now at this exact hour, and that in 12 hours they will not be wobbling anymore. He has already heard the American line on British caution, whispered in anger they are too scared to bleed. He has already heard the British line on American momentum muttered through clenched teeth, you people fight like a butcher shop. That pairing is not theatre. It is the core fracture. Inside the alliance, each side thinks the other one kills men for pride, and each side is absolutely certain it is the only adult in the room. The fracture is not only emotional, it is industrial. Britain in 1944 does not have another field army sitting in reserve if this one gets burned down in Normandy and northern France. The island has already emptied its cupboards, stripped its empire, and pulled boys and men through 5 years of attrition. The United States, by brutal contrast, is still acting like a country that can surge bodies, vehicles, fuel, and ammunition just by pointing and yelling, go. And in many cases, it actually can. Which means that Walker looks at a rifle platoon and he sees forward motion, pressure tempo, and a narrow vanishing window to break the German line forever, while Hallam looks at that same rifle platoon and sees irreplaceable faces he has shepherded through North Africa and Sicily and now Normandy, and he will not let them be fed into what he considers an American furnace just because the Americans are intoxicated by the smell of enemy panic. Both men believe they are the one preventing murder. Both men are convinced the other is lying about caring who dies. You can hear that argument in sound. Hallam is in the dim canvas of a British field tent lit, low voice under control, tracing neat arrows with a pencil laying down phrases in the Montgomery style. In due course, gentlemen, fire will precede movement, armour will drive the breach after the infantry has established flank security. We will not commit until our plan is synchronized. The tone assumes the battlefield can be sculpted like wet clay if you simply refuse to be rushed. Then the tent wall itself seems to vibrate, because from the road outside comes the American noise, the throaty churn of Sherman engines, all coughing awake at once, blackout-shrouded headlights pointed down a farm lane, 2.5-ton trucks bumper to bumper, while drivers lean on their horns and curse for fuel and bridge priority radios, all talking and stepping on each other because nobody is waiting for protocol. They are just spitting grid references and fuel states, and the word move repeated over and over. Hallam actually flinches at that roar. To him, it is not energy. It is proof of dangerous indiscipline, proof that these people will clog every approach, burn their own gasoline in place, and then scream at the British to come untangle the wreck, and he thinks that is how entire armies die. Walker hears the exact same roar, and finally feels his pulse steady because to him, that sound is life, is momentum, is the promise that the enemy will not get a clean hour to breathe. In that moment, Walker stops pretending this is about personality. He stops pretending it is about Montgomery wanting to look good for London. He understands with a kind of sick clarity that Montgomery is fighting a conservation war for an army that cannot regenerate, and that this conservation war is being enforced on American columns that are built to spend fuel and bodies like ammunition in order to buy hours. That understanding does not soothe him. It enrages him. He takes his pencil and starts carving numbers into the edge of the operations map. Not elegant thrust arrows, not doctrinal symbols, just raw times and fuel burns and distance to the next German blocking position and how long the bridge ahead will remain uncontested. 12 hours. Miles that could have been swallowed in silence tonight but will have to be taken tomorrow under German fire instead of just driven. He presses the pencil so hard into the damp paper that it tears because for him, every delayed hour is not an argument about pride between generals. It is a bill in American blood that just got more expensive. Dawn slides in, low and colourless over the hedgerow line, and for a narrow slice of time, the battlefield looks like a manual brought to life, because the British armour has formed exactly the way the sand table said it would form tanks, crouched nose to tail, in disciplined spacing, turret silhouettes, level commanders standing high in their hatches with goggles already wiped clean, infantry walking tight in step along the flanks instead of spilling outward, artillery having already hammered the first German positions into smoking holes before the sun is even properly up, and the deep green walls of the bocage that stopped them yesterday, now split, wired, marked, and opened like doors on hinges. Range flags flick up, hands chop forward, throttles rise in smooth controlled growls instead of panicked roars, and the column rolls into the breach on the exact minute the timetable promised, pushing down a single narrow lane that has been measured, cleared and protected from the sides by supporting fire so that nothing can rake it. And for that moment, it feels like proof that the method works that you gather, force you shape the ground, you crack one seam and you push a clean blade, right through the body of the German line, without wasting men in blind rushes or messy improvisation. Then the Americans hit the same opening, and the clean blade turns into floodwater full of wreckage, because what comes behind the British spearhead is not a neat follow-on wave paced by radio clearance and lane control. It is mass, raw, and shoving Shermans jamming forward two abreast, where there is only supposed to be room for one half-tracks muscling in off-angle just to get their guns pointed east, engineer trucks with bridging gear, grinding fenders with armoured recovery vehicles that are already dragging burned German hulls out of the path, medical jeeps trying to nose south to pick up stretchers and getting physically shoved, backward by fuel haulers that refuse to stop moving because fuel is life and stopping kills tempo, and every one of those drivers thinks they are the priority, and none of them are waiting for a British movement officer to bless them with permission, which means the single disciplined corridor Montgomery designed as a scalpel is within minutes swollen into a three-lane animal, the paved farm road, the churned dirt shoulder, and the ploughed field that was never intended to carry armour, but is now being flattened under tracks because nobody in an American helmet is going to sit and idle while there is open France in front of them, and the radios reflect that attitude instantly. Because the low-clipped British net that sounded like a gunnery range rehearsal a moment ago gets drowned under overlapping American bursts that step on each other, shout grids and fuel states, demand bridge priority, and repeat, move, move. Move with no regard for protocol beyond the need to be heard. On the paper map in the command tent, the thrust still looks beautiful, a tapered arrow driving forward on schedule, with follow-on echelons feeding in behind it. But out in the lane, the beauty is one bad minute away from turning into a graveyard. And the Germans move to make that minute happen, because even in late summer 1944, the Wehrmacht still knows how to counterpunch. So, instead of wasting effort firing at the lead tanks that are already past the break, German guns start dropping shells on the shoulders of the corridor. Not the nose, because they understand perfectly that if they can pinch the throat behind the point, then everything already pushed into that throat becomes trapped steel. A self-propelled gun that no one cleared in a farmhouse yard off the north hedgerow wakes up and starts spitting hard, flat shots into the flank of the traffic mass. And an MG position that yesterday was declared neutralized opens again because yesterday's certainty means nothing when you did not leave riflemen sitting on that hedge to keep it dead, and now trucks full of gasoline that were supposed to, stage 2 kilometers back, are sitting up front under enemy eyes, because their officer forced them forward to keep tempo, and bridging teams that were meant to be held in reserve for the next river crossing are physically wedged between tank platoons in this same bottleneck and cannot move either direction, and you can feel the whole thing choking like a lung on smoke. Walker is bent over the hood of a jeep with a damp operations map under his hand while this is happening, and the pencil in his fingers will not stop stuttering, because nothing on the ground is where doctrine says it should be. Units that were assigned to one controlled corridor have spilled and smeared into parallel ruts that did not even exist 5 minutes ago, but now exist because tracked weight made them exist. Convoys that were supposed to sit in protected staging areas are up in the kill zone because nobody in those convoys was going to wait quietly while somebody else took their road, and the neat British ladder of lead element support element, the reserve element, has been smashed into a single heaving column that is half assault force and half supply chain and half medical evacuation and half engineering asset, all jammed together. Which means when German shell bursts start walking in from the hedges, they are not just hitting tanks that can answer back, they are hitting bandage bags and fuel cans and bridge sections, and every one of those hits turns into wreckage that blocks whatever is still trying to move forward, and every wreck that stays in the lane for 60 seconds is 60 seconds taken off, the one number that Walker cares about more than any symbol or honorific or name, the number he keeps calling hours of freedom. Hours of freedom is his private clock, the time window between the moment the corridor opens and the moment the Germans seal it again with steel and fear. In theory, under Montgomery discipline, hours of freedom is something you guard from the top. You script the artillery to keep the shoulders suppressed. You meter armor in lanes, so the road never jams. You feed infantry in behind to hold. To hedges, so nothing wakes up on your flanks. And you buy yourself 3 or 4 safe hours, where you can shove combat power through that hole and fan out east before the counterattack hardens. But that theory assumes sequence assumes, grace assumes silence and control, and what is actually happening on this road is the opposite of sequence. It is the American religion of saturation, the belief that if you drown the breach in bodies and gasoline and barrels of ammunition and bridging gear and radio calls and raw will, fast enough, the German line will not get a chance to reform at all, and Walker believes in that religion so deeply it feels like pulse in his throat, even as he watches that same saturation flirt with self-destruction. For him, the chaos is 2 truths, fused together so tightly they hurt to hold, because on one side he can see the nightmare as clear as daylight, the nightmare where a single sharp German armoured thrust slams into the flank of this jam catches. Fuel trucks, medics, engineers, loaders, clerks, everybody, all locked nose to tail with nowhere to run and nowhere to turn, and carves them into burning wreckage in a sunken lane, the kind of massacre that writes headlines and ruins commanders. But on the other side, he can see the miracle that in less than 1 hour the Americans have already shoved more tonnage of tanks and artillery tubes and bridge sections and gasoline and stretcher jeeps through this single Norman, cut than any British timetable would have permitted in 3 hours. And that means, if and only if, the jam holds long enough to spill forward instead of dying in place, German defence to the east is about to be hit by a wave they cannot possibly absorb before nightfall. He knows that math in his skin, not in a lecture. He does not need a briefing slide to understand what that means. This is how you end the war fast. You smother the defender faster than he can breathe back in. A few meters up the lane, Pierce is standing in the middle of the churn with his clipboard hanging useless at his side, and his face has gone from staff officer pale to furious, blotched red because he is watching the corridor he laid out, like a surgeon's incision, turn into a clogged slaughterhouse floor, and he is screaming "halt" in a voice that was trained for calm authority. And the word "halt" dies under a Sherman horn that blasts so close to his head he physically jerks and throws both hands over his ears, like a man ducking an air raid. And that is the moment you can see doctrine crack in real time, because for Pierce that sound, the horns, the overlapping radios, the constant diesel growl, the drivers leaning out of cabs and yelling for fuel and shouting, "Move, move, move," with no rank and no patience, is not the sound of momentum. It is the sound of losing command, the sound of watching hard discipline dissolve into American chaos that will get men killed and then get blamed on him. Walker, looking at the same scene, breathing the same gasoline vapor and cordite, Stink hearing the same horns rattle his teeth, feels his heartbeat slam into a steadier rhythm because to him, That chaos is not proof of collapse, it is proof that the gap is still alive and pumping forward, and that if they can just keep it pumping for a few more stolen hours, the German line ahead will not get a second chance. The order tastes like rust before he even says it, and he knows with a clarity that makes his stomach go tight that this is the one line he swore he would never cross. The corridor ahead is still technically open, but it is starving. The fuel that was supposed to be there is still stuck west in a churn of jammed traffic and burned-out wrecks. The bridging team that was meant to lay steel across the next stream has not even reached the stream because they got folded into that same clot. The ammunition trucks that were supposed to top off the lead Shermans burned too much gasoline just idling in place. So now the lead Shermans are rolling forward, dry-mouthed. Every main gun round they fire becomes one less emergency. Answer: if German armour shows in the next field. Walker can feel it like a toothache in his temples. He can feel the German counterpunch forming. He can almost hear the shape of it, panzer engines coming in from the tree line on the right, hunting for the flank of the jam. And still, the thrust keeps inching forward because Americans only understand forward. Forward is doctrine, forward is pride, forward is oxygen. So when Walker opens his mouth and says, "Hold the word," feels like betrayal. The word feels like cutting his own throat. Engines drop off in layers, like lights going out in a city block. One Sherman throttles down and the vibration in the dirt under his boots softens. Another shuts off completely, and the hull metal pings as it cools. Truck horns, which 2 minutes ago were blasting fury down the lane, taper and stop. The overlapping radio barks fade down into short, angry, disbelieving bursts. Someone in the line yells, "You gotta be kidding me." Someone else spits a curse loud enough to carry. A loader slams his fist against his turret wall because he thought this was the push that was going to break them free into open country, and now he is sitting still in full view of every German with optics. The smell changes with the sound. Without the constant churn of exhaust, the air picks up the stink of hot gear oil and cooked brake lining and that sweet metallic singe of recent high explosive, and under it, all the earthy rot of French summer ditches. Silence does not feel like safety. Silence feels like being seen. Walker can hear his own breathing, and he does not like the way it sounds. Too shallow, too fast. He feels his pulse in his throat, in his wrists, in his jaw hinge. It is not the pulse of running. It is the pulse of shame. He has just ordered American armour to sit in a killing lane and wait. He has just ordered them to let Germans have time. He has just told them to do the very thing he has been cursing in the British for doing since they landed in Normandy. Every cell in him wants to walk it back, to say, disregard, to scream, punch through, drive, go, I will take the blame later. Every part of his body knows that is suicide. The flank is unsealed. The corridor behind them is choked with wounded wrecks, fuel that is now forward of infantry that is now guarding fuel instead of clearing hedges. If the Germans hit now in strength from the right, the whole forward spear does not just stall, it gets gutted. He can see it like a film strip running under his eyelids, panzer silhouettes appearing through hedgerow gaps, German guns stitching into the long exposed sides of American columns that cannot maneuver trucks full of gasoline turning into pillars of rolling firemen trying to bail out through narrow hatches and falling into burning ditches because there is nowhere else to go. He did not pause them to save Montgomery's plan. He paused them because if they keep going like this without flank security and without resupply, they are going to hand the Germans a massacre so big that higher headquarters will use the word catastrophe in cable traffic. He hates that the logic sounds like Montgomery. He hears Hallam in his head again, that calm British cadence saying, "We will not be rushed," and for the first time all night, he cannot just spit that line back with contempt, because in this one instant, with this one column, in this one throat, of Norman farmland rushing would be murder. He hates it. He hates that he knows it. He hates that he is standing here proving a British argument with American bodies sitting still as bait, while the window east cools down by the minute. This is the moment he feels irrelevant, and that feeling is almost worse than fear. Before he was the engine voice, the forward pressure, the man screaming, "We go now because now is the only thing that matters." Now he is translating fuel levels and flank gaps into the same language he mocked, hold tidy a line, wait for coordinated fire. The silence gives space for a second realization to crawl in a colder one that he has been pushing away because it disgusts him. This push is not just about ground. It is about credit. It is about who gets to say later we cracked them. Montgomery is already shaping the narrative of a clean, deliberate breakthrough under his control. American headquarters are already shaping the narrative of violent exploitation fueled by their speed. The press will come. The war correspondents will write. The pictures will be filed. Which flag is standing in which French town when the cameras arrive will outlive the names of the men who bled in the ditch outside that town. Walker can see that game suddenly, and it makes his stomach turn because it means this argument about tempo and caution is not purely about saving lives. It is about which general walks into history as the breaker of the German army in the West. He hates that more than anything because it tells him the break he is feeling on his chest is not only tactical prudence, it is political drag. Montgomery wants a breakthrough that he can point at and say this is mine, controlled, disciplined, inevitable proof that British method still masters modern war. American command wants rolling footage of columns blasting east mud, flying dust, boiling proof that American tempo and American logistics and American willpower cracked the crust and turned the German army from a wall into rubble. That is not two versions of the same story. Those are rival claims to the same piece of daylight. He understands now why road priority turned into screaming, why bridge access turned into physical shoving, why even map overlays felt like wrestling matches. They were not just fighting the Wehrmacht, they were fighting each other for the headline. That is the part that makes his breath hitch, because once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Once you know that some of the hours you are losing are being lost to positioning for narrative, you can never again tell a tired, bleeding sergeant in a stalled Sherman that the wait is only about safety. You have to admit, even if you never say it out loud, that some of that wait is about image. He feels dirty with that knowledge. He feels used by it. He feels small inside it. He feels for the first time since landing in France like a piece on someone else's board instead of a hand moving pieces. Engines sit cold. Men sit on steel. The open road east cools down like a pan taken off a burner. Somewhere in the near distance, a German engine coughs awake and settles into an ugly, steady idle that sounds way too confident, and all Walker can do is listen and swallow and hope his pause bought enough time for flank guns to come up and ammo to get forward before that German idle turns into a charge. He tries to steady his hands by flattening them on the warm hood of the Jeep, but the shake does not stop. His own heart feels too loud in the quiet, like it is giving away their position. Shame rolls through him in a slow, heavy wave because he knows exactly what he has just done. He has spoken the language he swore he would never speak. He has told killers built for forward motion to sit and let the moment cool. He has become for this hour the thing he spits at. Later, when someone writes it up and sends it upstairs and sanitizes it for the record, they will say, German armor pressure necessitated a temporary halt of exploitation elements pending flank consolidation. That is clean. That is safe. That hides the truth. Walker knows the truth. The truth is uglier and smaller and more poisonous. In that hour, German tanks were not what froze them. A British timetable did. Night holds the crossroads in a damp choke, the kind of Norman dark that does not go black so much as go heavy and close, and the only real shape in it is a Sherman hull, sitting crooked with one track half off, and the road mud packed thick, up along its belly and glacis in dried slabs. Somebody has welded a plate over a crack where a round kissed and spalled. Somebody else has stacked sandbags along the bow like a makeshift second skin. Signal wire has been wrapped around loose ammo crates and cinched fast to the turret bustle, so the boxes do not bounce off when the driver takes a rut too hard. 2 fuel cans are bolted to the side armor with hasty brackets. Another 2 are lashed in rope on the rear deck, and a 5th sits dented and leaking slow in the mud, like the tank itself is bleeding gasoline into the ruts. The markings say British. The silhouette says British. The attitude does not. This thing looks like it has been dragged through 3 different armies and kept running by force of insult. It looks American now. Walker runs his palm across the sandbags and feels how gritty and wet and slack they are. Not the neat, crisp, factory-cut fittings of a manual, just sacks, real sacks, jammed wherever a gunner felt naked, and tied down with whatever cord was close enough to grab. His hand slides to the welded patch and finds it still warm from torchwork. You can tell where the edges were not ground smooth, because the bead is rough and bright, and you can picture the mechanic that did it, not sleeping, not waiting for an order, just cutting scrap off something else and burning it in place, because the tank had to get back on the line before dawn, whether it looked pretty or not. He leans in and breathes the hull smell, burnt oil and cordite and old canvas and sweat steeped into the pads, and that thin, sweet, metallic tang of cooked armor. He has smelled it 100 times now. He still feels it in his throat every time. Hallam stands across from him with his hands in his greatcoat pockets like he is trying to stay out of the picture, but he is not leaving, and that alone tells Walker this is not a lecture. Hallam is quiet for a long time, and then says almost conversational that this is not how an army is meant to fight, and he gestures at the cans bolted on the patched metal, the crates wired to the bustle, the loose tarp draped and tied down, with commo line instead of proper straps, and his voice carries no contempt, only exhaustion. And he says, "We do not build them like this." And Walker answers, "We do not either. We just refuse to stop them." And that breaks the seal between them. What comes after is not friendly, and it is not sentimental, and it is not two allies shaking hands over the shared hardship of a hard day. It is closer to two surgeons, comparing which one cuts deeper and which one lives with the scream at night. Walker says flat, because he does not have the energy left to coat it, that the United States can afford this kind of stupidity, and he slaps the side armor with his open hand, so the whole tank gives off a tired metal ring, and he says we can afford to run columns hot and run convoys, nose to tail, and burn gasoline like air, and shove bridges forward, before the map is fixed, and pull drivers out of one wreck, and toss them into the next truck, and call that continuity. And you cannot. And he does not mean you as in Hallam personally, he means you as in Britain, and the word lands in the air like a blade tip. Hallam does not flinch, which is almost worse. Hallam says just as flat that American speed is the only reason certain gaps ever opened at all, and he nods his chin east like he is pointing through the dark to where the line bent earlier in the day, where British armoured doctrine would he have taken 2 more nights and 3 more fire plans to stage, and instead, American armour simply rammed and turned and rammed again, until the German flank peeled up like wet paper, and he says, without that pacing, without that constant pressure, without that refusal to pause, even when pausing would have been sane, our group could not have forced that breach, and he is not giving praise, he is issuing a professional report. Walker feels tired all the way in his bones because it sounds like a truce, but it is not. It is an admission of need which is uglier. He says we can afford to run trucks to death and just send more trucks, and Hallam nods. He says we can afford to throw gasoline at a problem until it goes away, and Hallam nods. He says we can afford to lose tempo to a bad call and buy it back with volume and still have enough left to push again, and Hallam nods. Then Hallam finally looks up from the mud and says, "We cannot," and the way he says cannot is not pride, it is marrow. "We cannot," he says, like a man saying, "I cannot tear another strip from my own skin to bandage your wound. We do not have another full field army in a warehouse somewhere. We do not have crews to simply plug into burned-out hulls like fresh spark plugs. Every battalion we bleed now is a slice out of what is left of our country. We have to stage. We have to time. We have to promise the mothers that their boys were not thrown blind into a furnace to make some colonel's arrow look bold in the morning paper. We cannot do what you do, because if we do it, we stop existing." Walker hates that he respects the honesty. He hates that he understands it. He also hates that he has his own numbers, and they make him just as sick. He says 12 hours, and Hallam knows exactly what 12 hours means, because they have been circling that same number since yesterday. 12 hours, lost to pause, to timetable, to tidy, to coordination, to the blessed be patient that came down from above, and then Walker says 8 miles, and that is how far they clawed in one reckless push once the gate finally opened. 8 miles of hedgerow and road junctions, and nervous French villages with white sheets out the windows and dead panzers still smoking in orchards. 8 miles that should have been 12 or 15 if they had been allowed to drive when. The Germans were still staggered, instead of when the Germans had had time to call their armour back into something like a line. And then he says, 23. And Hallam holds the look, because he knows what 23 is. 23 bodies they could count so far from just one battalion in that one mad hour where the column jammed and the Germans' first blind counterpunch raked the flank. 23 laid out on tarps by the culvert, waiting for collection. And Walker's jaw tightens when he says it, because he is not shrugging those men off as acceptable loss. He is doing something colder. He is building his own indictment, 23 men for 8 miles, when it could have been fewer if we had moved at night when their line was broken, 23 price tags for a delay that did not have to happen. Hallam fires back with his own tally, and his voice cracks for the first time all day, because he says 3 and 3 is the number of tanks left in that British squadron that can still fight without hours of spanner work. And then he says, 2 and 2 is the number of crewmen from the troop that went in first this morning, who are still walking and talking and not lying under ponchos behind the hedgerow. And then he says, 1. And 1 is what he has left in reserve on that axis, that he trusts to respond to a German armoured thrust in the next 2 hours. And then he says, if I burn that one tonight because you insist on sprint, I will have nothing to stop. Counterattack in the dawn. And if I have nothing in the dawn, and the Germans counterattack in the dawn, they cut your spear off and sack your fuel trains, and then tomorrow the paper says, my inaction lost your war. It is an ugly little speech. It is also true. The crossroads is quiet except for the tick of cooling engines and the low murmur of wounded voices somewhere in the dark. Off to the left, one American driver is asleep upright against his steering wheel with his hands still on it, mouth open, face lit dull by a covered hood lamp. Farther down the lane, 2 British stretcher men carry a man whose boot is missing and whose ankle is wrapped in field dressing so soaked it looks black. There is no glory here to photograph. There is just metal that refuses to quit and flesh that is nearly out of currency. Walker rests his hand on one of the jerrycans. Bolted to the patched Sherman's side, feels the dent, feels the grit, feels the vibration still humming through the hull from some deep place in the engine that has not fully settled, and he says, this almost to himself, and almost to Hallam, and almost to whatever staff officer will read the report later. This is what wins. Not your clean arrows, not my speeches about tempo, not anyone's perfect map. Just gasoline you can bolt to whatever is still moving and shove through the hole before it closes fuel at speed. And the way he says it is not admiration for American genius or contempt for British caution. It is a tired surrender to the Tatey too. The fact that this ugly, bolted, wired, leaking improvisation is the thing beating the German army right now, while both nations argue about style. By the end, he stops lying to himself about what they are really arguing over because it was never just style, and it was never just ego, and it was never only that Bernard Montgomery talked like the room already belonged to him. It was time, it was who owned the clock. It was who got to decide how long the enemy was allowed to breathe. Walker can finally say it without heat. The fight inside the alliance was not about who had the smarter plan or the prettier arrow. It was about whose way of war could deliver force faster into a fresh gap before that gap closed. That is the only currency that mattered. A plan that wins next week is worthless if the window you could have punched through tonight is already sealed by morning. A thrust that looks like chaos and wastes gasoline and shreds formations still counts as genius if it drowns the German counterattack before it can form. He can say that now because he has watched both systems under stress. He has watched British discipline open a perfect lane at dawn, with almost ceremonial control, artillery first, armoured thrust second, infantry tightening the seam, every move timed to protect crews Britain cannot replace. He has watched American saturation hit that same lane like a flood, ugly and disobedient and almost suicidal, shoving tanks and trucks and fuel and bridging gear and medics and ammo through so fast, the map could not keep up gambling that weight and speed would smother the German line before the German line could reset. He has also watched the cost-burned men in stalled columns because the flank was not covered yet, fuel trucks sitting under German guns, because the column outran its own security, junior officers screaming for clearance that nobody could give because command control had been blown apart by sheer overcrowding. He has felt both sides' fear in his own chest. British fear is we are running out of an army, and if we waste it here, there is nothing left for tomorrow. American fear is we are running out of hours, and if we let them stand back up tonight, we will have to kill them again tomorrow at twice the price. Neither fear is cowardice. Both fears are math. He puts numbers on it in his head because numbers are the only way he can stand to remember it. How fast can you get hard power onto a living breach? Tanks, fuel artillery tubes, bridging sections, radios that still work, medics who can still drag a man breathing out of a burning half-track. Not promised power, not theoretical order of battle on a chalkboard, not prestige formations that are technically assigned to the sector. Actual mass on the road in the mud pointed forward in the next 6 hours. That, he decides, is the war. Whoever can deliver more combat power per hour of opportunity owns the future of the gap. Whoever cannot is telling stories about yesterday. He hates how clean that sounds because the truth did not feel clean. The truth felt like sitting in a stalled lane in Normandy and hearing engines wind down while German armour warmed up in the dark tree line to the east, and realizing that the break on your chest was not German fire, yet it was your own side, telling you to wait. He can finally admit the part that tasted like poison all summer. The Americans hated Montgomery because his doctrine wrapped a choke collar around their momentum at the exact second they believed momentum was the only mercy left. Every enforced pause felt like being told their dead men could sit on ice while someone else arranged a neater picture. Every denied bridge, every ordered halt, every gentleman in due course, landed like you will cool your engines so we can claim this properly. They heard condescension. They felt theft. They called it arrogance, because arrogance sounds cleaner than saying, you are wasting my men's blood, so you can frame the story. The British resentment cut just as deep in the other direction. They looked at American speed and did not see genius. They saw a bonfire built out of things Britain no longer had to burn. They saw drivers run convoys into active kill zones just to keep tempo. They saw armoured thrusts launched on starving flanks because someone in an American helmet believed in forward at any cost. They did not call it courage. They called it butcher work. From their side, Montgomery was not strangling victory. He was stopping mass suicide dressed up as heroics. Each army thought the other one was lying about caring who lived. He knows now both sides were telling the truth for themselves. Both sides were also deadly to each other. That is the part nobody will put in the official history, and that is the part he is going to carry in his teeth for the rest of his life. The doctrine that is being born in this mud is not Montgomery's tidy set piece, and it is not pure American saturation. It is colder. It says count how much killing force you can push into a fresh seam in the next 6 hours, and do whatever feeds that number, whether that means pausing to keep a flank alive or running convoys like mad through a gap before the Germans blink. Awake. The argument about pride, about credit, about whose arrow gets drawn on the map and whose name sits on the caption under the liberation photo, all of that still matters to the men with rank, but the battlefield itself does not care. The battlefield cares about resource over time, combat power per hour of opportunity. That is the verdict. Perfection protects prestige, but it burns time. Speed burns men, but it ends wars. In France in 1944, time was worth more than prestige. The hatred was never just about a man in a beret. It was tempo, rage, coalition rage, two exhausted armies trying to finish the same war with two different definitions of acceptable loss and finding out in real daylight that each definition could get the other one killed.